Welcome to the YouTube channel of Open Doors Metropolitan Community Church in Seoul, Korea. We're glad you're here. We're a community seeking to live out the radically inclusive love of Jesus the Christ. We are a faith community of the Progressive Christian Alliance and an emerging church of metropolitan community churches. Please join us now for excerpts from the service held on Sunday, September 18th, 2016. This was the 18th Sunday after Pentecost, as well as the third Sunday in creation. The theme of the service is our relationships, past, present, and future, and the preacher is the Reverend Craig Bartlett. This Sunday came at the end of the Chuseok holiday in Korea, the Korean version of Thanksgiving. Therefore, we included a brief ceremony to honor people we wished to remember, and the sermon focused on relationships, which are often revisited at holidays such as these. Due to video problems, we apologize that we're able to broadcast only the sermon itself. Nonetheless, we hope you'll enjoy it and find it helpful.
We're coming up to the end of the Chuseok holiday, and as I noted in my service announcement, Chuseok's a time when people get together with families and friends to renew connections and acquaintances. However, we should not be blind to the fact that just like family gatherings in the West, like Thanksgiving and Christmas and landmark birthdays and family funerals, these gatherings can sometimes be fraught with tension as the children who have become adults with their own personalities rub in friction against each other and also against elder relatives. Relationships can't be perfect. And family gatherings like these can't be always moments of unadulterated happiness and relaxation and shiny, happy people. Okay. So today, I thought relationships was a good theme to think about. And I want to take a look at some of the relationships which are hinted at in our readings today, and which deserve our attention. Of course, with this being the season of creation, we've been focusing on our relationship with that wonder, which is our planet. As one Eucharistic prayer put it, refers to the earth as this, our island home. And without repeating too much of what I said last Sunday, our relationship with this island home leaves something to be desired. From the garbage that we've spewed into the atmosphere, buried into the land, and dumped into the sea, it shouldn't be surprised now that some of that garbage is getting into our bodies. I remember watching a story on CBC News one time in Canada, and this was an environmental story, and it began at a daycare center in Ottawa, capital city of Canada. And at this daycare, virtually every child that was there was on some kind of inhaler. This was unheard of when I was growing up. This, someone who was asthmatic was considered to be a rarity. Now it seems to be more the rule than the exception. And we can't, it doesn't take much imagination to figure out why that situation is. And we're all familiar with the climate change deniers, but there's another form of denial these days, which I call it denial. And it rests in this idea that we don't really have to worry all that much because the earth will heal itself. And one of the prime promoters of this idea is the physicist Robert Laughlin from Stanford University. Yet, even though there is evidence that ecosystems will do whatever they can to try and restore the balance, the stasis that is always there, there are critics who have rightly asked, well, how much time will this process take? And will we humans give the planet enough time to let the ecosystems do their work? And what will be the impact on human communities of these natural processes? So we might ask with the prophet, is there no balm in Gilead? Or as I often put it, and I'm going to put it today in the form of a question, will God's reign come? Will God's will be done because of us or in spite of us? So that's one relationship we need to keep in mind today. Another relationship that we should keep in mind today, and I say this as as a leader of a faith community which is a proponent of progressive Christianity, which is something different from what you're going to hear in the majority of churches here in Korea, including the English medium ones. We need to think about the relationship to the past, particularly our past, and particularly to the halls of power. Throughout the season of creation, many of our second readings this month are coming from the first letter of Paul to Timothy. And this is known in scholarly shorthand as one of the pastoral letters. These are letters which were written from an elder in the faith to a younger person just starting out in church leadership, trying to give practical advice as to how the faith should be taught and practiced. Most modern scholars, have come to the conclusion that these letters were probably not written by the historical Paul, but were written by someone who was writing in Paul's name. Okay? And this is not an uncommon practice of that time. Now, if you compare the historical situation that's hinted at in the pastoral letters, and you compare that with the historical situation of letters like Paul's letter to the Romans, or even better to the Galatians, we can see a shift. And it's very clear. The church, as it is described in the pastorals, is one which is, excuse me, more accepting of its place in the social order of the day, rather than challenging it, rather than providing an alternative to it. So, if you read a letter like 1 Timothy all the way through, and if you haven't done that lately, I invite you to do that sometime this week. I would invite you to ask yourself, as you read a letter like 1 Timothy, does this sound like a church which is willing to proclaim Jesus is Lord and Caesar is not? Because really, in the letters which are not disputed as being from the historical Paul, we're now coming to understand that was the outlook of the time. They were providing an alternative. Part of their evangelism was going up to the people of the day and asking them, well, what has Caesar done for you lately? And, what has Caesar done for you lately? And if they said, well, Caesar's doing pretty fine by me, end of discussion. But if somebody said, well, I'm not really doing all that well by the Roman system these days, then they could start a conversation about the alternative. So, but it's very clear that within the pastoral letters, this is the image of a church. That's okay. All right. This is a church which is trying to fit in. Right down to the 30 pyong apartment, the tower air conditioner, the satellite TV, wireless internet connection, and the electric range and oven. And we all know what the oven is the most important usage of an oven in Korea. Storing your instant noodles, your ramyun. That's what our sister-in-law has done most often with the oven, of the gas range and oven that we bequeathed to her when we moved to China. Sometimes I go to that house and I cry. What are you doing? But anyway, so we have a right, and I think we have a responsibility to practice that good old phrase from Paul Ricoeur. It's important for us to practice that hermeneutic of suspicion. To be suspicious of some of those messages, and that's not unchristian. That is being Christian in the modern era. That is being a Christian in the modern world. And it's really sad to see that there are still so many Christians in the world who are unable and unwilling to do that. One of the people I follow on Facebook and social media is a commentator named Jory Micah. She's an activist within the evangelical community for full inclusion of women in ministry in the church. And she rails against that idea, which is very common in evangelical circles, called complementarianism. You figure, what the hell does that mean? It means that within the church, men and women have complementary yet very distinct roles, and it's often used as a means of justifying the dominance of men over women in home and in the church, and excluding women from preaching and teaching roles. Well, she was an adjunct lecturer at a Bible college. I think it's a Bible college, but she was fired this week, and it's very sad to see. She did a live message, and you could see she was upset about it. But she's kept her wits about her. She's kept her dignity, and she says, "This is not the will of God. This is the will of the enemy, and let's stay with it. And I'm not going to give up my ministry." Perhaps this was a means of saying that the world of academia was not for me, and that my real ministry is somewhere else. And in the midst of all of her her writing and all that, you still had these men coming on, trying to claim that this complementarian vision. And in order to do it, they have to have an entirely closed system within their minds I mean, I read what they write, and it's so obvious. All Scripture is God-breathed, and therefore it could only Scripture commentates on Scripture. It is a perfectly closed system. Slavery is a historically conditioned system, but the headship of man over woman is eternal, and it comes from Christ. Paul is speaking directly for Christ. He is speaking directly the voice of Christ. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, one enlightened man who... No, he is enlightened. One enlightened man just kept taking this person's arguments and saying, chronic epistemic closure. Your fail. We can talk about epistemic closure later. But we have a right to be skeptical of those messages. We have a right to be skeptical. We have a right to question things like what we've read this morning. Yes, we want to pray for everyone. Yes, we want to pray for those in authority. But what is it exactly we should be praying for them? What is it we should be asking from the divine for them? That's something to think about, and that's something that we have every right, and as modern Christians, we have every responsibility to think about critically. And this leaves us with the gospel reading from Luke. Probably one of the most obscure parables that Jesus has ever told. And we know this because in our reading for today, the first 7 verses itself are the parable. That's it. The next 6 verses are Luke's community literally tying itself up into knots, trying to explain, well, maybe it means this. Well, maybe it means this. Maybe it means this. Some of the interpretation itself, if you read it, you might think this is kind of contradictory. But I'd like to go back to the parable itself. If we can put those other things aside and just concentrate on the first 7 verses. The parable itself.
Sure.
Yes. So we've got this manager. Now, remember that in the society of the time, this manager was probably either a slave or a freed slave, what we know as a freed person or a freedman. And they were set with managing this business person's property. Now, this business person was probably one of those people who was taking the land of subsistence farmers away from them, taking it out of production of grains, putting it into something like olives or grapes for wine, vineyards, which would increase the return by about, at that time they figured about 40%. But this guy was taking subsistence farmers' lands away, taking away the land of peasants. So this master probably wouldn't have had a very good hearing in the ears of those who listened to this parable for the first time. So this manager is the victim of basically a whisper campaign. And he's in danger of finding himself out on the street. And so what does he say? And how many of us can hear the echo of what he says in our own lives? I'm not strong enough to dig or work yet another shift of overtime or take yet one more private lesson or go for yet one more interview or enter yet another relationship. And I'm ashamed to beg. I'm ashamed to admit just how lonely I am, or how desperate my situation is. or how difficult it is for me these days just to keep things together. In this parable, nobody's perfect. The manager basically provides evidence of what he's been accused of. He cooks the books. And the master's debtors are only too willing to play along. Because they were probably some of the people who were in danger of losing their property. But the dishonesty is not the point. I would put it to you, if we just think of the purpose of a parable. The purpose of a parable is to say what the reign of God is like. That was Jesus' intent. And if we look at it perfectly, if we look at it only from that point of view, it seems to me that the big thing is about release from debt. Of turning the expectations of the world upside down. Those who in the world of the day are on the bottom, well, they have a chance to rise to the top. They are the ones who will come first. First coming last and the last coming first. And so yet there may be hope for all of us. All of us who have been or who do live in fear of not being counted among the world's rich or favored. We can find ways, and we have found ways, to make our own communities of inclusion, our own families of choice, our own places where there is room for all. But the lesson for us is that as we have been welcomed, it's imperative upon us to extend that welcome to others. For that is the nature of the reign of God. So, as we share our gifts this morning, as we break bread together after the service, I invite you to talk about some of these things with me and share your own thoughts. Thanks be to God.
Amen.
We thank you for watching. We also invite you to participate in our life as a faith community in person. All are welcome to join us in our worship and our ministry. Age, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, ethnicity, ability, and economic status are not barriers to participation. This is what we mean when we say radically inclusive. We worship at 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings in the Haebangchon district in Seoul. For more information about us, our location, and our ministry activities, please check our website at www.opendooorskorea.org. We hope to see you soon.